Have you ever wondered what happens to the people no one remembers anymore? Where does memory go when a name is erased? And what if it doesn't go anywhere? What if it waits, buried beneath the ground, whispering from the water we drink every day? In the spring of 1993, relentless rain turned Mason County, West Virginia, into a drowning landscape. The ground sank, roads collapsed, and on the outskirts of Hollow Creek, the earth opened near an ancient Holloway well. State hydrologist Michael Grant arrived that morning to inspect the site. The workers refused to go near it. They said the water was breathing. A man of logic, Michael didn't believe in superstition. But as he leaned over the edge, a chill rose from below, slow and human, like something exhaling in his face. The cracked stone rim bore an inscription barely visible through the moss. Holloway Estate, 1842. He remembered his grandmother's warning. Don't look into that well, Mikey. It looks back. The thought made him smile until his flashlight dimmed. The water didn't reflect the light. It absorbed it. The darkness inside was too thick to be natural. His assistant Caleb watched from behind, pale and uneasy. My grandfather worked here, he said quietly. After the fire, nobody came back. Folks said the Holloways kept something under the house. What kind of something? Michael asked. Caleb's voice dropped. The kind you're not supposed to bury. They set up a tripod, fixed the rope, and Michael began to descend. The air grew heavy, colder, a suffocating silence pressing against his chest. The walls were made of ancient stone, perfectly fitted, etched with faint symbols that didn't belong to any known language. About 25 feet down, his beam caught a section of newer stonework, smoother, cleaner, sealed. He tapped. A dull thud, then a metallic echo, a hollow behind it. He began prying out the stones one by one. When the last block came free, a gust of stale air burst out. Mold, rust, and something sweetly rotten. His flashlight pierced through the opening. A narrow tunnel stretched forward into blackness. We should report this, whispered Caleb. But Michael had already stepped through. Behind them, the water stirred, and for a single breath, it whispered his name. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one man to crawl through. The air was colder here, not the kind of cold that comes from the earth, but the kind that feels aware of you. Michael moved slowly, brushing away clumps of soil that crumbled at his touch. The beam of his flashlight wavered across rough walls, revealing claw-like grooves etched into the stone. They weren't marks of tools, they curved, spiraled, and crossed like something scratched from inside. At the end of the short passage, the tunnel opened into a small chamber carved directly into the rock. The light trembled as he stepped inside. Wooden shelves lined the walls, warped and blackened with age. Upon them, dozens of glass jars, each carefully sealed with wax and labeled in fading ink. Michael froze. Inside every jar was something. Ribbons of hair, bits of fabric, rings, a child's marble, a rusted locket. Some held small bones, others something like folded paper soaked and yellowed. He wiped the dust from one jar and read the writing through the glass. Eliza Turner, age 10, Harvest Moon, 1881. The next one, Samuel Dyer, 9 years, taken October 17, 1873. The word taken appeared again and again. He set the flashlight down, its light trembling across the jars. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each with a name, each with a date, each with something personal like a memory bottled and preserved. Behind him, Caleb crawled into the chamber, his voice shaking. What is this place? Michael didn't answer. He was staring at a set of papers beneath the shelves, brittle sheets covered in tiny handwriting. One was still legible. Those whose names are forgotten must be remembered through the vessel. The vessel keeps the memory, and the memory feeds the depths. Caleb backed toward the tunnel. We should go. This is wrong, Mike. Michael nodded slowly but didn't move. His eyes were on one jar in particular. A small one, almost clear, with fresh condensation on the inside of the glass, as if something inside it still breathed. He felt his stomach twist. From somewhere deep behind the walls came a faint drip. Then another. Each drop echoed too long, as if the sound had miles to travel before fading. Michael raised his flashlight toward the far end of the chamber and froze. The rock wasn't solid. It had a narrow seam, almost invisible, running vertically down the wall. The mortar was newer, like a door sealed from the inside. And on the stone surface, drawn in dark, oily streaks, was a circle of symbols, identical to the marks he'd seen higher up the shaft. He touched the stone with his glove. It was wet. Not from groundwater, it was sweating. Caleb, he whispered. Look at this. But when he turned, Caleb wasn't near the entrance anymore. He was pressed flat against the wall, eyes wide, staring at the jars. There, he swallowed hard. They're moving. Michael glanced back. The condensation inside several jars trembled. A faint rattle like glass breathing. Then a soft click from one lid like pressure escaping. Something about the air changed. Heavy, wet. The smell of old metal thickened, mixed with something sweet and human. A whisper moved through the chamber. Low, layered, impossible to trace. It wasn't one voice. It was many, and they were saying the same thing again and again, too quietly to understand. Caleb bolted for the tunnel. Michael stayed 1 second longer, just enough to hear the words clearly. The water keeps them. He grabbed his flashlight and scrambled back toward the well, dirt filling his mouth, lungs burning. Behind him, the whisper grew louder, now echoing like water pouring through cracks. By the time he reached the surface, rain had started again. Thin, cold, relentless. Caleb was standing a few feet from the well, pale as chalk. "What was that, Mike?" he asked, trembling. Michael looked back into the dark mouth of the well. For a brief moment, he swore he saw light beneath the water. Pale, shifting, as though reflected from hundreds of tiny glass surfaces. He said nothing. He only stared. And deep below, the echo of that whisper rose again, barely audible through the storm. The water remembers. Eleanor Price had spent most of her life chasing ghosts made of paper. Names erased, lines crossed out, archives eaten by mold. But nothing had ever felt like the Holloway estate. In the county library, the family's records were almost too perfect up until 1898, tax ledgers, land deeds, church attendance, social events. Then, abruptly, the paper trail went cold. No visitors, no letters sent, no photographs. The Holloways had vanished from public life, as if the entire family had drawn its curtains and sealed the doors forever. Among the estate documents, Eleanor found something odd. A box mislabeled as household correspondence. Inside were 6 letters written in a delicate, looping hand. The ink had browned, but the words were clear. Each was signed by Sophia Holloway, daughter of Gregory Holloway, the manor's founder. March 3, 1895. Father went down again tonight. He stayed until dawn. When he came up, his hands were covered in dark symbols, circles within circles, drawn with something that shimmered in the lamplight. He wouldn't let me touch him. He whispered Mother's name, though she's been gone 5 years. October 17, 1897. They brought another child. Father says his blood is needed to keep the gate asleep. I can't bear it. But he says it's too late, that we are already bound to what lies beneath, and if it wakes hungry, it will take us instead. Eleanor read those lines again and again until her hands shook. She checked the county birth records for those years. No children matching the names mentioned in the letters existed. None. It was as if they'd been erased. Then came the newspaper clippings, small, easily overlooked. Local boy missing, last seen near Holloway Creek. Family offers reward after daughter disappears on Route 6. The dates matched Sophia's letters almost exactly. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the cracked window of the archives room. Outside, rain began to fall, the kind of steady Appalachian rain that seeps through stone. Somewhere far below, beneath all that forgotten earth, there were still rooms that no map acknowledged. Rooms where names were kept. In her final field note, written the night before she left Mason County, Eleanor scribbled one last line in her journal. The Holloways didn't worship something they found here. They settled here because it was already waiting for them. The Holloway fire began on the night of November 6, 1898. The storm had been raging for 3 days, hammering the valley with wind and rain. Yet the flames rose higher than the downpour, burning against the sky like a wound that refused to close. Witnesses claimed it started in the library, the oldest part of the manor, built from black Appalachian stone that was said to never catch fire. And yet it did. The blaze was green, not the orange of wood or the red of oil, but an unnatural emerald glow that shimmered like burning metal. When the townsfolk tried to douse it with water from the creek, the flames hissed and swelled, climbing the rain itself. By morning, the manor was gone. Nothing but the front steps and a half-collapsed well remained. The Holloway family was declared missing, presumed dead. But when the ashes cooled, the sheriff's men found something the fire had not touched. A fragment of paper, perfectly intact, resting atop the blackened floorboards. Eleanor Price read the surviving description in an 1899 police report. A single page, written in a mix of Latin and unknown symbols. Edges unburned though surrounded by ash. The ink emitted a faint green sheen when exposed to light. The fragment was later lost in transit to the state archive. Some claimed it was stolen. Others whispered that the man who handled it fell ill and vanished within weeks. In the private journal of Reverend Thomas Avery, the town's aging priest at the time, Eleanor found another clue. His entry from November 8, 1898 read, "They opened what should have remained sealed. I heard them calling through the smoke. Not cries for help, but names I did not know, spoken in voices not their own. The fire would not die until dawn. Even the rain turned black. The handwriting broke at the end of the page, smudged by something darker than ink." Eleanor closed the brittle journal and looked through the rain-streaked window of the county archive. The Holloway estate had been built near an ancient creek that cut through limestone, a place long feared by early settlers. Before the first church was raised, the native Shawnee spoke of that same valley as the throat of the earth, where the water carried voices that were not the wind. Her notes for the Holloway research ended with a single theory. The family's rituals were not inventions of madness. They were continuations, remnants of older worship, perhaps older than this land's history itself. Long before the Bible reached these hills, there were rites to honor what lived beneath the water. The Holloways didn't invent it. They remembered it. In the dim light of her office, Eleanor read the Reverend's last line once more. They opened what should have remained sealed. Outside, thunder rolled across Hollow Creek. For a brief moment, when the lightning flashed, she could have sworn she saw it. A faint green shimmer, reflected in the puddle by her window. The same color the fire had burned. The color that never dies. The excavation began under a government permit that no one wanted to sign. Officially, it was a geological study, nothing more. But the locals of Hollow Creek watched from a distance, whispering that the ground there was wrong. that the water moved beneath it even when the rains had stopped. When the archaeologists broke through the final layer of limestone, the ground collapsed into a void. Beneath the old foundation of the Holloway estate, they found a circular chamber, perfectly carved into the bedrock. No tool marks, no seams, no mortar. Just smooth, curved stone, as if melted into shape by something that understood geometry better than man ever could. The chamber was vast, 30 feet across, 10 high. The walls were covered with symbols, etched in spirals and arcs, their grooves filled with a black, tar-like substance that shimmered when light touched it. Some of the patterns matched the strange marks from the old well. Others were new, forming shapes that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. In the center stood a stone slab, waist-high, with a shallow hollow carved in the shape of a human body. Narrow channels extended from the slab toward the edges of the room, like veins branching through the rock. When they ran a sample analysis, the results came back impossible. Microscopic traces of blood, belonging to multiple individuals, some of them separated by thousands of years. The carbon dating from the residue returned even stranger data. The blood was ancient, older than the first settlers, older than recorded civilization on the continent. 3,000 years. Dr. Karen Mills, the team's lead biologist, wrote in her notes, "It's not a burial site. It's a mechanism. Everything about this chamber feels constructed, not by nature and not by people like us." Magnetic readings spiked as soon as the lights were installed. Compasses spun. Cameras glitched, screens filling with static. The team began hearing distortions, faint humming that grew louder the closer they stood to the slab. It wasn't random noise. The frequency formed rhythmic patterns, almost speech. One of the assistants, a young geophysicist named Evan Shaw, claimed he heard whispers directly in his head. He described them as wet voices, murmuring through layers of rock. The others laughed nervously until he collapsed near the center of the room. When they revived him, his pulse was erratic, eyes unfocused. He whispered a single sentence. "They're still there. The water remembers." After that, no one spoke for a long time. By evening, 2 members of the crew refused to go back inside. Others reported nausea, dizziness, and the constant sense of being watched. A faint vibration pulsed through the air, timed like a heartbeat beneath the floor. When the team packed up for the night, Dr. Mills sealed her recorder and left a final note. "We are not standing in ruins. We are standing in a waiting room." Outside, Hollow Creek was silent, the rain long gone. But under the soil, deep in the stone, something still hummed, soft and steady, like water breathing in its sleep. At first, the scientists thought it was contamination. The water samples collected from beneath the Holloway estate showed levels of organic matter far beyond anything natural. Living tissue, microscopic fibers, fragments of DNA. But none of it matched any known species on record. Under the microscope, the material seemed to pulse faintly, like something alive that refused to die. When light hit the samples, the water shifted color for a split second, from clear to a dull green, the same hue survivors once described during the fire of 1898. Dr. Karen Mills sent the data to 3 separate labs. Each returned the same impossible result. Unidentified genomic sequence. Closest resemblance. None. Then came the behavioral reports. A lab assistant who inhaled the vapor during filtration claimed to have heard whispering through the hum of the centrifuge, like many voices underwater. Another worker fainted after describing the smell of wet stone and metal that no one else noticed. By the time the results reached the state university, 2 of the team members had quit, refusing to handle the samples again. Meanwhile, Michael Grant hadn't slept in days. He'd been ordered to assist the research group as a local consultant, but since the excavation, he had grown pale, hollow-eyed. His colleagues said he was working late nights, alone in his house on the hill above Hollow Creek. He kept journals, notebooks filled with numbers, astronomical symbols, and long sequences of dates. In the margins, a repeated phrase appeared again and again, scrawled in uneven ink. Each well is a door. Neighbors later told investigators that Michael would stand outside for hours, staring toward the old Holloway property, whispering calculations to himself under the moonlight. They said they heard him talking to someone or something, though he lived alone. When his supervisor visited, he found the house dark except for the kitchen. On the table were several open notebooks, a half-empty glass of water, and a hand-drawn chart mapping the lunar phases against groundwater levels across Mason County. Each intersection was marked with a small symbol, a circle crossed by 3 lines, the same design carved into the stones beneath the Holloway estate. The reports described other strange incidents. Michael claimed to hear voices through running water, in the sink, the shower, even in rain against the window. They never spoke clearly, only fragments. Below, memory, open. At night he dreamed of movement, something shifting under the ground, like lungs inhaling through stone. The dreams left him drenched in sweat, the sound of dripping water still echoing in his ears when he woke. In one of his final notes, dated June 12, Michael wrote, "It's not sound I hear, it's pressure. The water pushes back when I listen, like it knows I'm there." When the field team analyzed the same well water weeks later, they found elevated traces of dopamine and serotonin in those who had handled it, as if the liquid itself triggered emotional and sensory responses in the brain. The official report labeled the substance neuroactive. Unofficially, the researchers called it something else. They called it the whisper. A year after the Holloway excavation, Michael Grant vanished. No witnesses, no struggle, no goodbye. One evening he drove out of town, and by morning his truck was found abandoned on a dirt road leading toward the ruins of the old estate. The driver's door was open. Inside, everything was dry, except the seat, soaked through as if someone had climbed in straight from the rain. But that night there had been no rain. In the passenger seat lay a stack of maps, hand-drawn, covered with winding lines and small, inked circles. They weren't geological charts. They were tunnel systems sprawling beneath Mason County like veins. Each line connected to a mark labeled Source. The final page carried a single sentence, written in a trembling hand. "It wasn't them who chose the place chose them. And now it has chosen me." In the trunk, police found 6 glass jars, sealed with wax, identical to the ones recovered decades earlier from the Holloway well. Each jar contained cloudy water, and something small suspended inside. A lock of hair, a coin, a torn fragment of a child's ribbon. The county report listed the items as unidentified artifacts. Within weeks, the jars were transferred to the state lab. They were never seen again. 2 weeks after Michael's disappearance, the first child went missing. Then another, and another. Local authorities blamed flooding, wild animals, runaways. Anything but the truth. No one wanted to speak aloud. Parents began locking their wells at night, nailing boards over them as if that could silence the sound of what whispered inside. Those who lived near Hollow Creek swore the water had changed. It tasted wrong, metallic, bitter, as though the earth itself was bleeding. Laundry washed in it came out with faint stains of rust, and animals refused to drink from open buckets. At night, when the wind was still, some claimed they heard voices rising through the pipes. Not one, but many, whispering together like breath beneath glass. A woman from the next valley said she heard her missing son's name echoing through the well behind her house. She listened only once. After that, she poured cement into the shaft and moved away. By midsummer, 5 children had disappeared from towns surrounding the Holloway property. Search teams combed the forest, the creeks, the mines, but every trail ended near water. The last recorded incident occurred in early August. A local boy named Ryan Cooper, age 11, vanished while fishing along the Hollow Creek tributary. His bicycle was found on the bank. The tire tracks led down to the mud and stopped at the edge of the stream. The water there was calm, clear, but when rescuers stepped in, it shimmered faintly under the flashlight. A thin green glow spreading outward from where the boy's footprints had been. That night, the sheriff sealed the Holloway property once more. The official statement called it unstable ground and contaminated groundwater. Unofficially, no one in Mason County went near the wells again. But in the silence after dark, when the air grew heavy and still, people said they could still hear it, faint and rhythmic, the sound of breathing through water, and a voice whispering from somewhere far below. The cycle isn't over. It started as a student project, a harmless academic curiosity. In the spring of 2010, a small research group from the University of Virginia arrived in Mason County to conduct a groundwater study. Their goal was simple: compare chemical compositions of rural wells across the Hollow Creek Valley and map possible contamination after decades of flooding and abandoned mining. At first, the data looked routine. The wells varied in depth, age, and location. Some drilled into shale, others carved through limestone. But when the lab reports came back, the results didn't make sense. Every single sample, from 22 different wells across 8 miles, shared identical molecular signatures. The same mineral ratios, the same microscopic organic structures. As if all the water had come from one source, a single underground body feeding every well. The lead researcher, Professor Daniel Reeves, couldn't explain it. "It's impossible," he wrote in his preliminary notes. "Each of these aquifers is geologically isolated. There is no natural connection between them, yet the water behaves as if it remembers the same origin." When they examined the organic residue, things grew stranger. Under a spectrometer, Reeves identified microscopic biological fragments, cells, fibers, tissue-like material. DNA analysis confirmed human sequences, but only partial. Other strands didn't match anything in the human genome or any other genome in global databases. In his private email to the university's biology department, Reeves called the discovery a bridge between species that should not exist. The official report was never filed. 2 weeks later, the team returned to collect follow-up samples. By then, locals had started talking, saying the students were digging too deep into the wrong places. One night, when the group was staying in a rented farmhouse near Hollow Creek, all their computers crashed simultaneously. When they rebooted, the data from every external drive was corrupted. Files opened as pages of static noise. Only one document remained readable, a log from Reeves' personal recorder. It ended abruptly with the sound of running water and a faint voice whispering, "It spreads." The next morning, Daniel Reeves was gone. His car was still in the driveway. His shoes stood neatly by the door. No footprints, no struggle, just damp soil leading toward the forest behind the house. The university classified the event as a missing person case and recalled the students. The investigation was quietly closed. But a few months later, one of the research assistants leaked fragments of the corrupted data online. In between the static and digital noise, analysts claimed to hear layered frequencies resembling human speech. Faint, overlapping voices repeating a pattern. "We are one. We are below." After the story spread through the county, fear returned to Hollow Creek. Residents sealed their wells, poured concrete into the shafts, and hired contractors to drill new boreholes. Yet no matter where they drilled, the water tasted the same, that same cold, metallic edge. And sometimes, when the nights were windless and the valley went still, People swore they could hear it again. Not wind, not earth shifting, but a chorus rising faintly from beneath the ground, whispering through the pipes and drains. We never left. By 2018, the legend of Hollow Creek had become internet folklore, a ghost story traded on forums and true crime channels. That summer, a small paranormal investigation group from New York decided to prove what everyone else dismissed as myth. They called themselves the Crossline Project, a mix of engineers and sound technicians who specialized in electromagnetic phenomena. They arrived in Mason County on August 3rd, bringing thermal cameras, EMF meters, and infrasound recorders capable of capturing frequencies below the human hearing range. Their plan was simple: 3 nights of monitoring around the ruins of the Holloway estate, then a full report for their documentary channel. The first night passed quietly. The equipment logged low-frequency pulses, steady, rhythmic, barely perceptible. The signals came from underground, registering between 17 and 19 hertz, a range known to trigger unease, nausea, even hallucinations. But these pulses weren't random. They followed a structure: 4 beats, pause, then 3, repeating endlessly. On the second night, the recorders picked up something new. A faint, modulated tone began weaving through the bass frequency. When slowed down, it resembled a human voice. Not one, but many, layered like echoes in water. Audio engineer Marcus Cole processed the file through a spectral analyzer. His log entry read, "Signal integrity confirmed. Pattern consistent with organized speech. Phrase detected, repeated 42 times. We were never gone. The water keeps us." The team replayed the sound through the night, staring at the waveforms that flickered like heartbeats across the screens. Outside, the wind was dead still, and the creek that ran past the estate made no sound at all. Yet the microphones kept recording motion vibrations from beneath the soil. By dawn, all 6 recorders failed simultaneously. Batteries drained, memory cards corrupted. That evening, Marcus began to act strangely. He complained that his ears wouldn't stop ringing, that he could still hear the voices even when the equipment was off. He refused to sleep, pacing the farmhouse, muttering fragments from the recording. On the 3rd night, he told the others he was going to follow the sound back. When they realized he was gone, it was already too late. His footprints led from the house toward the river that fed Hollow Creek, and ended at the water's edge. No splash, no struggle. Only his flashlight, half submerged, still glowing faintly beneath the current. The team left Mason County before sunrise. They deleted every backup, claiming the data had been inconclusive. But locals remember what they left behind: a single waterproof microphone still buried near the well. Sometimes, when the storms roll through the valley, it crackles back to life on the frequency it was tuned to record. And in the static, beneath the hiss of rain, the same words return: quiet, endless, patient. We were never gone. The water keeps us. In 2021, a team of independent filmmakers arrived in Mason County to shoot a documentary called The Holloway Files. Their aim was to trace every layer of the mystery, from the 1898 fire to the disappearances, from the corrupted data to the voices recorded underground. What they found was not a story. It was a warning. The director, Laura Keene, managed to locate Caleb Morris, Michael Grant's former assistant. He was an old man now, living alone near the state border. The interview lasted only 20 minutes, but every second of the footage felt heavy, as if the room itself was listening. Caleb's hands trembled as he spoke. "People think it was just water," he said, "but I saw it move. I saw it breathe. It remembers faces, voices, names. I heard it whisper the names of the ones who'd been gone for years. Names nobody alive should remember." He paused, staring off past the camera. "And one night," he added quietly, It said mine. After that, Caleb refused to continue. The crew left him sitting by the window, staring toward the dark outline of Hollow Creek. The final sequence of the Holloway files was filmed a week later at the ruins of the old estate. They lowered a waterproof microphone into the same well that had started it all. At first, there was nothing, just the faint hum of static, the echo of dripping water. Then came the voices, hundreds of them, layered, overlapping, childlike and ancient all at once. The words were soft, rhythmic, rising like bubbles from the dark. We remember you. The sound grew louder, the water began to vibrate, and the screen filled with distortion, like something reaching toward the lens from below. Then silence. The footage ended there. The documentary was never officially released. But the final frame still circulates online, white text on a black screen. If you ever hear your name whispered from a well, don't answer. Because the water never forgets. And it never lets go.